The autumn wind howled through the trees, casting skeletal shadows across the cracked pavement. Leaves swirled around the street in a frenzied dance, their dry whispers echoing the unease that had settled over the town of Grey Hollow. It was a night like any other, the kind that urged people to cozy up in their homes, shut the windows tight, and turn on the TV. But tonight, it wasn't the usual sitcoms or reality shows that flickered on the screen. Instead, it was a message that would change everything. Sarah Palmer slouched on her worn-out couch, the flickering light of the television illuminating her tired face. She had just settled down with a cup of chamomile tea, ready to unwind after a long day at work. The gentle buzz of the kettle still echoed in her ears as she absent-mindedly flipped through channels, searching for something that would distract her from the weight of the world. Outside, the night deepened, shrouding the town in an oppressive darkness that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Just as she was about to turn off the TV and call it a night, the screen abruptly switched to a static-filled emergency broadcast. The jarring sound jolted her from her stupor, and she leaned forward, her heart racing. The familiar logo of the emergency alert system appeared, stark against the flickering black and white. Sarah's pulse quickened as a deep, disembodied voice filled her small living room. "This is an emergency alert. Please remain calm. This is not a test." The words hung heavy in the air, sending a chill down Sarah's spine. The voice continued, steady and urgent, detailing an unseen threat that loomed over Grey Hollow. Sarah's breath quickened as the reality of the situation sank in. The voice urged everyone to stay indoors, lock their doors, and refrain from any unnecessary travel. But it was the next part that sent a shiver coursing through her. "There are rules to survive," it said, the tone growing more intense. "These rules must be followed. Failure to comply may result in severe consequences." The broadcast was accompanied by grainy footage of chaos in the streets. People running, sirens blaring, shadows flitting just beyond the camera's reach. Each clip flickered with the urgency of a nightmare, the people depicted either terrified or frozen in place. Sarah gripped her teacup tightly, feeling the warmth seep into her palms as her mind raced to process what she was seeing. "Rule 1, the voice continued, cutting through the chaos. "Do not answer your door, no matter what you hear. The threat can mimic voices of loved ones to lure you out." A knot twisted in her stomach. She thought of her mother, who often stopped by unannounced, and her younger brother Ryan, who would knock incessantly until she opened the door. How could she ignore them? The thought of turning them away sent a wave of panic through her, but she forced herself to focus. Rule 2, if you see anyone outside, do not engage. They are not what they seem. The chilling warning echoed in her ears. Who were they? The images on the screen shifted to show a figure darting between shadows, its movements erratic and unnatural. Sarah's heart raced. This was no ordinary emergency alert. It was the harbinger of something far more sinister. Rule 3, keep your windows covered. If they see you, they will come for you. As the message continued, Sarah felt a cold sweat trickle down her spine. She glanced around her small apartment, her eyes landing on the windows that overlooked the street. They were thin, barely able to keep the biting wind at bay, let alone anything else that might try to breach the barrier. She had always prided herself on living alone, enjoying the solitude, but now it felt like a curse. Finally, the voice said, growing quieter, almost conspiratorial, "Rule 4, trust no one. You are not safe." The screen flickered, static crackling like thunder, and then abruptly cut to black. The sudden silence was deafening. Sarah sat frozen, her mind racing. The emergency alert was over, but the message had sunk in deeper than she could have imagined. She felt as though she were suffocating, the air thick with tension. Her phone buzzed violently on the table, shattering the silence. With trembling hands, she picked it up, half expecting to see a message from her brother. Instead, it was a group chat message from her friends. They were all equally shaken, exchanging fearful messages about the broadcast and sharing their own frantic interpretations of the rules. "Did you see that?" One text read. "What do they mean, trust no one?" "Should we just stay put?" Another replied. "I don't want to risk it." Sarah typed back hastily, her fingers flying over the screen. "What do we do? Should we meet up?" I feel so scared alone." Her phone pinged again almost immediately, but before she could read the response, a loud thud echoed from outside her door. Sarah's heart raced as she instinctively pressed her back against the couch, a deep instinct telling her to remain silent. She held her breath, straining to listen. Another knock, louder this time, followed by a voice. It was muffled, but there was something familiar about it. "Sarah, it's me. Open up, please. Ryan." The knot in her stomach tightened further. Panic surged through her as she recalled the rules. She knew she shouldn't open the door, but how could she ignore her brother? The tone of his voice was laced with desperation, and every instinct urged her to let him in. What if something had happened? What if he was hurt? "Sarah," he called again, the panic rising in his voice. "Please, I need your help." She hesitated, her mind racing. She felt torn between two worlds, the chilling reality of the broadcast and the warm familiarity of her brother's voice. What should she do? "Rule 1, she whispered to herself, the voice from the broadcast echoing in her mind. "Do not answer your door, no matter what you hear." Sarah glanced at the window, half expecting to see shadows lurking beyond the glass. The darkness seemed to creep closer, the edges of her vision blurring with the weight of fear. She could hear her own heartbeat, a drumbeat of dread, as she thought of the lurking unknown outside her door. "Sarah, please." Ryan's voice broke through her thoughts, filled with urgency and fear. "You have to let me in. I saw something terrible." Tears pricked at her eyes as she fought against the instinct to rush to him. She wanted to throw open the door and pull him inside, to feel the safety of his presence wrap around her like a warm blanket. But that nagging voice in the back of her head screamed for caution. What if he's not really Ryan, she thought, trembling as her mind conjured images of the threat that had been outlined in the broadcast. What if he was one of them, luring her into a false sense of security? Suddenly, a sound from behind her made her jump. The TV flickered back to life, the emergency broadcast starting again with its relentless monotone voice, a chilling reminder of the world outside. "Trust no one. You are not safe." Desperation clawed at her heart as she faced a choice that could determine her fate. Would she heed the warning and lock her brother out, or would she risk it all to save him? Outside, the wind howled, drowning out Ryan's frantic calls. She felt trapped between love and fear, the boundaries of safety blurred in the darkness that pressed against her. The walls of her small apartment felt like they were closing in, suffocating her with dread. Taking a deep breath, Sarah forced herself to move. She turned off the TV, silencing the frantic voice that echoed her fears, and crept towards the window, carefully pulling aside the curtain just enough to peek outside. The street lay cloaked in shadows, illuminated only by the dim light of a flickering street lamp. It cast long, distorted shadows that danced across the pavement, and for a moment, she thought she saw something shift in the darkness, a form darting just beyond her view. Panic surged through her, and she pulled the curtain shut, heart pounding in her chest. "No," she whispered to herself, shaking her head. "I can't do this." The knocks on her door grew louder, more insistent. "Sarah, please, let me in." As she stood there, torn between instinct and the rules that could save her life, the weight of the unknown pressed down on her. She could feel the air thickening with dread, the room closing in around her as she faced the ultimate question. How far was she willing to go to survive? The pounding at the door escalated, echoing through Sarah's mind like a war drum, each strike compounding her dread. She pressed her back against the wall, feeling the cool surface against her skin as her heart raced. Shadows from the flickering streetlight danced ominously on the wall, distorting her perception of safety. "Sarah, please." Ryan's voice was a mix of panic and urgency. "I swear I saw something out there. You need to let me in." The rules echoed in her mind, each one a chilling reminder of the danger lurking just beyond her door. Rule 1, do not answer your door, no matter what you hear. It felt like a shackle around her conscience, binding her to a decision that could cost her dearly. I can't just leave him out there, she thought, the conflict raging within her. Ryan was her brother, her flesh and blood. Memories flooded her mind, him running into her arms as a child, the laughter they shared, and the countless hours spent on the couch watching movies. How could she abandon him now, when he needed her most? But as she took another cautious glance out of the window, her heart sank. The street was empty, devoid of movement, but the oppressive darkness felt alive, creeping closer as if aware of her turmoil. A flicker of movement caught her eye near the edge of her view, something darting in the shadows, and her stomach twisted with unease. "Stay calm," she muttered to herself, steeling her resolve. "Think logically." She had always been the cautious one, the voice of reason among her friends. Yet tonight, logic was at war with emotion. She pulled back from the window, her heart racing. "Sarah," Ryan's voice broke through her thoughts again, more frantic than before. "Please, I can't explain everything through the door. You have to trust me." Trust. The very word sent a chill down her spine, reminding her of the warning. She remembered the cold voice from the emergency broadcast. "Trust no one. You are not safe." But what if Ryan was telling the truth? What if he truly was in danger and the broadcast was just adding to the paranoia? The internal struggle intensified. She couldn't ignore him, but what if she was making a mistake? A loud crash outside her apartment made her jump, and she instinctively moved to the door, hands trembling. It sounded like something had fallen, a trash can maybe, or was it something worse? "Sarah, please, just open the door. I'll explain everything, I swear." His voice was desperate now, filled with fear and urgency. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as the weight of indecision bore down on her. What if he was hurt? What if she never saw him again? In that moment of vulnerability, the image of her brother, terrified and alone, flickered in her mind. What if he was standing out there, cold and scared, while she wrestled with fear? "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head as if the motion could erase the decision she was facing. "I can't leave him out there." With a sudden surge of adrenaline, she moved towards the door, her heart hammering in her chest. She needed to make a decision, and fast. As she reached for the lock, the broadcast's warning echoed in her ears, drowning out the warmth of her thoughts. But the moment her hand touched the doorknob, she hesitated. What if it wasn't Ryan? What if something sinister waited on the other side? "Sarah," his voice was strained, filled with an urgency that made her skin crawl. "They're coming, you don't understand." She stepped back from the door, panic rising in her throat. "Who's coming?" she called out, her voice shaky. "What did you see?" "I'll tell you everything," Ryan replied, the fear in his tone palpable. "But you have to trust me, please." The desperation in his voice pulled at her heartstrings, but the warnings loomed larger than her feelings. She was about to scream at him to tell her more when the power went out, plunging her apartment into darkness. A wave of cold washed over her, wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. She fumbled for her phone, the light illuminating her face in a faint glow. With her pulse quickening, she pointed it towards the door. The shadows deepened, stretching across the room, while the silence that followed felt ominous. The darkness was alive now, pressing against her. Panic clawed at her throat as she remembered the final rule: trust no one. You are not safe. The darkness wasn't just outside her door, it was in her mind, a creeping fear that something was watching, waiting, just beyond the threshold. And with the lights out, the sense of vulnerability was overwhelming. "Sarah," Ryan's voice again, this time sounding more frantic. "You have to let me in, I'm begging you." Without thinking, she turned off the light on her phone, plunging herself into the oppressive darkness. If she let him in and something happened, she would never forgive herself. She could barely hear the frantic pounding outside her door over the sound of her own heartbeat. "Please, Sarah, I'm scared. I can't be out here alone," Ryan shouted, the panic in his voice palpable. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she pressed her back against the door, feeling the wood beneath her fingers as if it were a lifeline. She closed her eyes, heart racing, and listened to the pounding of her heart echoing in the silence. Suddenly, the sound of glass shattering echoed through the air, piercing through her fear. It came from somewhere in the building, somewhere close. "Did you hear that?" Ryan asked, his voice a desperate whisper now. "They're here. Sarah, please, they're coming." Adrenaline coursed through her veins as she fought the urge to respond. She was paralyzed by fear, feeling the walls of her apartment closing in on her. And then, out of the stillness, came another sound, a faint, haunting whisper. The voice was indistinct at first, a low murmur that seemed to drift through the cracks of her walls. It coiled around her, wrapping her in a shroud of terror. "Sarah," it breathed, an icy chill washing over her. The voice was eerily familiar, yet warped, as if someone were twisting her name into something unrecognizable. "Ryan," she called, her voice trembling, but there was no response. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices overlapping, each one sending shivers down her spine. She pressed her hands to her ears, trying to block them out. They echoed through her mind, growing more intense, more desperate. "Sarah, help, let me in." And then she understood. The voice was not just a figment of her imagination, it was coming from outside her door. The realization struck her like a lightning bolt, and she recoiled, breathing heavily. The knocking had stopped. The silence was deafening, replaced by the eerie whispers that surrounded her, closing in. The shadows seemed to thicken, swirling like a dark mist. She was trapped. With trembling fingers, Sarah picked up her phone again, using the weak glow to scan the room. A gust of wind rattled the window, and the shadows seemed to dance in response. The whispering voice returned, cold and chilling. "Sarah, you must let him in." "No," she shouted, her voice echoing back at her in the silence. "I won't." The air turned heavy, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against her. She could almost feel them watching, waiting for her to make a choice. With every passing second, the tension escalated, the darkness looming closer. And then, as if in response to her defiance, the whispering intensified, swirling around her like a storm. The walls seemed to pulse, closing in on her as the shadows lengthened, distorting her sense of reality. "Sarah," they murmured, a chorus of voices laced with malice. "You are not safe, let him in." A primal fear gripped her, and she stumbled back, the phone slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor. The light flickered out, leaving her alone in the suffocating darkness. "No, I won't," she cried, fighting against the panic rising in her throat. But deep down, a part of her knew this was not just about her safety. As the whispers grew louder, she felt an overwhelming need to flee. She turned and bolted toward the window, her heart racing. She would not let the darkness consume her. Desperately, she pulled open the curtains and peered outside, her breath catching in her throat. The street was still empty, shrouded in shadows, but the wind had shifted, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. In that moment of clarity, she realized she had to choose her next move carefully. The broadcast had warned her of the danger outside, but it had also warned her of the danger lurking in the shadows of her own home. With her heart pounding in her chest, Sarah made a decision. She would not wait for the darkness to claim her. She had to confront whatever horror awaited her, whether that was outside her door or within her own mind. "Ryan," she called, her voice breaking through the oppressive silence. "I'm coming." Gathering her resolve, she returned to the door, her heart racing as she took a deep breath. She wouldn't let fear dictate her actions any longer. She had to trust herself, even if the rules urged otherwise. With a trembling hand, she reached for the doorknob once more, ready to face whatever lay beyond. But as she began to turn it, a sudden crashing sound echoed from the other side, followed by a chilling silence. Fear surged within her, and she hesitated again, wondering what had happened to Ryan. Was he okay? Was he even out there anymore? "Sarah," the voice whispered again, now more insistent. "You must let him in. Only then will you be safe." Her heart raced as she took a step back from the door, glancing at the window, then back to the darkness that surrounded her. She could feel the cold tendrils of fear wrapping around her, and for the first time, she felt truly alone. What would she do? The heavy silence in Sarah's apartment was suffocating, punctuated only by the erratic thumping of her heart. She stood before the door, poised between instinct and terror, her breath hitching in her throat. Outside, the world was a dark void, the once familiar sounds of her neighborhood now replaced by a haunting stillness that sent chills crawling up her spine. "Let me in, Sarah." Ryan's voice cut through the silence, but it sounded distant now, strained and muffled. It made her pulse race, but the thrill of fear curdled the warmth of concern in her chest. Was it really him? The warnings from the emergency broadcast echoed relentlessly in her mind. "Trust no one. You are not safe." Her grip tightened on the doorknob, a battle raging within her. She wanted nothing more than to fling the door open and pull her brother into her arms, to feel the comfort of family in a world that was spiraling into chaos. But each instinct screamed against it, reminding her of the whispers that danced in the darkness, coaxing her toward doom. A sudden crash jolted her back to reality, a loud sound that reverberated through the walls. It was coming from the direction of the window. She turned, panic seizing her once more. "No, not now," she breathed, rushing towards the window, her heart pounding like a drum in her ears. The darkness outside seemed to thicken, a swirling mass of shadows that crept closer, stretching like fingers eager to grasp at her. She peered through the glass, straining to see through the inky blackness. At first, all she could see was her reflection, wide-eyed and pale, and then, just beyond the edge of the streetlight, she saw it. A shadow, moving with a purpose, darting behind the parked cars, merging into the darkness. Sarah's stomach twisted, the fear gripping her with icy fingers. She needed to act. Was it Ryan outside, or something much worse? She had to know, but the prospect of unlocking the door sent a fresh wave of panic surging through her. "Sarah," Ryan's voice again, this time more insistent. "Please, I'm begging you. You have to let me in. They're here." The word hung in the air like a noose. Her heart raced as she turned back to the door, her fingers trembling against the wood. What if she opened it, only to find a stranger standing there, a monster hidden behind the familiar facade? She could almost feel the darkness clawing at the edges of her sanity, whispering promises of betrayal. She hesitated, unsure of her next move, when suddenly the lights flickered back on, illuminating her small living room. The sudden brightness was disorienting, chasing shadows away but revealing the stark reality of her situation. Ryan's silhouette appeared through the frosted glass of the door, a dark figure against the light. And she felt her heart lurch. She could see his outline clearly now, the familiar form of her brother, but the fear still lingered in the back of her mind. What if it wasn't really him? "Sarah, open the door." His voice cracked with urgency, a plea that twisted her heart. "Please, they're trying to get in." She could feel the weight of his fear hanging in the air, heavy and palpable, almost suffocating her. She took a step back from the door, the warmth of the light casting a false sense of security around her. I'm scared, Ryan," she called out, her voice trembling. "What did you see? What's happening?" He took a deep breath, desperation lacing his tone. "I was walking home when I saw something in the woods. It was moving wrong, like it was not human. I turned around to come back, but something followed me. It wanted me to stay." As he spoke, the shadows outside seemed to shift, coiling like smoke, almost as if they were reacting to his words. The air felt charged, electric with something unspeakable, a palpable dread that settled over her like a shroud. "Ryan," she whispered, doubt creeping in again. What if he was lying? What if he was not even Ryan? "Please, Sarah, I swear I'm not joking. You have to let me in." In that moment, the world outside felt impossibly distant, an abyss filled with threats she couldn't comprehend. She could hear muffled noises behind him, faint rustling, an unsettling chorus of whispers that seemed to resonate from the shadows. "Let me in," he urged again, pounding on the door. "You can't trust them. They want you to open the door. Please, I'm begging you." The pleading in his voice tugged at her heart. She took a step forward, instinctively reaching for the doorknob, but as she grasped it, another crashing sound echoed from outside, louder and more violent than before. "Sarah, they're here," Ryan shouted, his voice now filled with an urgency that sent fear racing through her veins. The air thickened with a sense of foreboding as the shadows shifted just outside her window, looming larger and more menacing. The lights flickered again, and she felt a rush of adrenaline propel her into action. "Get back," she shouted, and without thinking, she threw open the door, her instincts screaming at her to act. But as she stepped into the hallway, the world outside her apartment was not what she expected. The light from her living room illuminated the dim corridor, revealing the chilling reality of her surroundings. Ryan stood before her, his eyes wide with fear, but behind him, in the darkness of the hallway, shapes moved. Tall and grotesque, their forms contorted and twisted, they slithered like smoke, creeping closer to where she stood. The light from her apartment flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced around them. "Get inside," Ryan urged, panic etched on his face. Sarah stumbled backward, heart racing. "What are they?" she gasped, fear tightening its grip around her throat. "Just come in, please." He grabbed her arm, tugging her inside as the shapes shifted closer, whispering in an incomprehensible language, their voices a cacophony that resonated in her bones. In a moment of clarity, Sarah felt the terror in Ryan's grip and knew that whatever was behind him was something they had to escape from. With a sudden burst of strength, she pulled him inside and slammed the door shut, locking it with shaking hands. The sudden silence that enveloped them felt surreal, yet the air hummed with tension. What the hell was that? Sarah gasped, stepping back into the living room, her pulse racing. I don't know. Ryan panted, his face pale. They followed me. I don't know what they are, but they wanted me to stay out there. The urgency in his tone chilled her. She could see the fear in his eyes, reflecting her own as they stood in the fragile sanctuary of her apartment. The walls now feeling thin and permeable. What did they look like? She asked, trying to make sense of the terror that enveloped them. He shook his head, eyes wide. They were shadows, like they were made of darkness itself. They moved wrong, like they didn't belong to this world. As he spoke, the whispering outside intensified, the voices melding into a chilling symphony. It felt as if the shadows were closing in around them, waiting, watching, and perhaps seeking a way in. Sarah, he said, taking a step closer, his voice urgent. We need to barricade the door. If they get in. His voice trailed off, but the unspoken fear loomed large between them. With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah nodded, moving to grab the coffee table. Together, they shoved it against the door, but a sudden banging reverberated through the wood, causing both of them to jump. Ryan, she shouted, heart racing. What do we do? Just stay quiet. We can't let them know we're here. He crouched down, pressing against the wall beside the door, his eyes darting nervously around the room. The whispers outside morphed into a low hum, an eerie melody that sent shivers racing down Sarah's spine. She could feel the temperature in the room drop, a cold chill washing over her as if the shadows were creeping closer, hungry for something. I can't stay here, she whispered, her voice trembling. We have to get out. Get out, Ryan echoed, panic creeping into his voice. Where would we go? They'll be waiting for us. But even as he spoke, Sarah knew they couldn't stay here. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the shadows outside were only growing bolder. Let's go to the kitchen. We can barricade ourselves there, she urged, her mind racing. He nodded, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. They quickly moved toward the kitchen, adrenaline coursing through them. The world outside felt like it was teetering on the brink of chaos, and they were caught in the eye of the storm. Once in the kitchen, Sarah grabbed a heavy chair, her heart pounding as she wedged it against the door. Ryan joined her, pushing another table against it, his hands shaking. I hope this holds, he said, breathless. Just keep quiet, she urged, glancing out the small window that overlooked the alley behind her apartment. She could see the faint glow of the streetlight, but the shadows in the alley seemed to pulse with life, moving in unnatural ways. Sarah, Ryan whispered, crouching low as they pressed against the wall. Do you think they'll try to come in? I don't know, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, but I have a bad feeling. The darkness beyond the window felt alive, swirling in an endless dance, and she shivered. The whispers morphed again, rising and falling like a tide, and she pressed her hands over her ears, trying to block it out. Stay quiet, Ryan hissed, but even he seemed transfixed by the shadows moving outside, an unholy spectacle that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Do you think we should try to call for help? Sarah suggested, her heart racing with anxiety. But as she reached for her phone, a sudden realization struck her. The signal might be down. What if nobody could help them? The emergency broadcast had warned them about the chaos unfolding outside. What if their cries went unheard? Before she could voice her thoughts, another loud bang reverberated through the apartment, causing them both to jump. It sounded like something heavy had struck the door, and the chair began to slide slightly. Ryan, she gasped, feeling her heart race. It's okay, he insisted, gripping her arm tightly. They can't get in. Just hold on. But the shadows outside seemed to grow thicker, weaving together into a darkness that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. They whispered in an unearthly language, and a chill washed over her, making her skin crawl. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, casting eerie shadows across the kitchen. In that moment, Sarah caught a glimpse of something beyond the window. Figures moving, not just shadows, but shapes that seemed to shimmer with a dark light. Sarah, look, Ryan said, his voice barely a whisper, pointing towards the window. She turned, her breath hitching as she watched the figures coalesce outside, standing still and watching. Their faces were indistinct, shrouded in darkness, but she could feel their eyes, hollow, empty pits that seemed to bore into her soul. "What do they want?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "I don't know," Ryan replied, shaking his head, "but I think we need to do something, fast." They watched, frozen in terror, as the figures began to move closer, gliding across the ground as if they were part of the shadows themselves. The whispers grew louder, becoming a chaotic symphony that clawed at her sanity. "Sarah," Ryan's voice was filled with urgency, pulling her attention back to the door. "We can't just wait here. They'll find a way in." She nodded, adrenaline surging through her as they moved together, searching for anything they could use. "We need to block the windows too, if they get in." The thought hung heavily in the air, unspoken yet understood. "Let's do it," Ryan said, his voice steadying. They began to pile whatever they could find against the windows, dishes, pots, anything that might serve as a barrier. The shadows outside loomed larger, a creeping darkness that felt almost sentient, watching and waiting as they struggled to fortify their fragile sanctuary. "We can't let them in," she whispered, fear igniting a fire in her chest. "We have to protect ourselves." Just as they finished barricading the last window, another crash resonated from the door, louder this time. It shuddered against the frame, the chair sliding dangerously close to giving way. "They're trying to get in," Ryan shouted, panic rising in his voice. "Keep pushing against it," Sarah urged, bracing herself against the door. The sounds from outside were growing louder, a mixture of desperate whispers and low growls that sent shivers down her spine. "Sarah," Ryan yelled, fear etched into his features. "They want to get in." The shadows outside seemed to swell and pulse, moving with a dark, almost eager energy. With every moment, the sense of dread intensified, and she could feel the walls of the kitchen closing in, the weight of the unknown pressing heavily on her. "We need to find a way out of here," she shouted, adrenaline coursing through her veins as she scanned the room for an escape. But as she looked around, the realization hit her. There was no way out. They were trapped, and whatever was outside was closing in, waiting for the moment they would break. "Sarah," Ryan cried out again, his voice tinged with panic. They're coming for us." Her breath hitched as she pressed her back against the door, trying to hold it shut against the relentless pressure. The shadows outside were almost tangible now, swirling with a life of their own, beckoning her toward the darkness. The air grew colder, the whispers swelling to a deafening crescendo, a chilling symphony that resonated deep within her. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yeah," Ryan replied, his expression a mix of fear and determination. "But we can't let them win. We have to stay strong." The weight of his words filled her with a flicker of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. Together they could face this. But as they braced against the door, the whispers began to morph into something more sinister, echoing through her mind. "Sarah," they hissed, a collective voice that sent a chill racing down her spine. "You must open the door. Only then will you be safe." The words wrapped around her like a vice, and she felt a cold sweat trickling down her back. "No," she shouted, her voice ringing with defiance. "I won't." The shadows pressed closer, eager and hungry, their whispers rising in intensity. She could feel the weight of their desire, an insatiable hunger that threatened to consume her. "Sarah," Ryan shouted again, pulling her back to the present. "Stay with me. We can't let them win." The fear in his voice jolted her, snapping her back to reality. They were stronger together. They could resist this darkness, whatever it was. But just as she steeled herself, another loud crash reverberated through the door, more violent than before. The chair splintered under the pressure, and she could feel the wood beginning to give way. "Hold on," she shouted, pressing her shoulder against the door. "We can't let them in." In that moment, she realized they were fighting more than just shadows. They were battling against despair itself, and the shadows seemed to sense it, pressing harder, the whispers rising in a frenzy. "Let me in," they shrieked, their voices echoing through the kitchen like a cacophony of lost souls. "No," Sarah cried out, the determination surging within her. "We are not afraid." But deep down, she felt the fear creeping in again, clawing at her sanity. What if they broke through? What if the darkness consumed them both? Suddenly, the door splintered, a loud crack reverberating through the air as the weight of the shadows pressed against it. "Sarah," Ryan shouted, desperation etched on his face as he fought against the door. In a moment of clarity, Sarah grabbed a heavy frying pan from the counter, her heart racing as she turned to face the door. "If they come in, we'll fight back." "Right." Ryan nodded, determination blazing in his eyes as they braced against the door once more. With the shadows closing in, the atmosphere became electric, charged with an ancient energy. The whispers morphed into a chilling wail, echoing through the kitchen like a tempest. The door buckled again, the frame cracking under the relentless pressure. "They're coming," Ryan yelled, panic surging in his voice. "Stay strong," Sarah shouted, gripping the frying pan tightly as they prepared for the inevitable. As the door finally gave way, splintering under the weight of the shadows, she swung the pan wildly, striking at the darkness, but it felt like hitting smoke, an elusive force that slipped through her fingers. The shadows surged into the room, writhing and coiling like tendrils of darkness, and she felt the cold wash over her, pulling her toward the abyss. "Ryan," she screamed, the panic rising in her throat. But he was right beside her, fighting against the shadows with a fervor that ignited her own courage. Together they faced the darkness, a fragile line of defiance against the encroaching void. "Don't give in," he shouted, gripping her hand tightly. "We can fight this. We are stronger together." And in that moment, as the shadows swirled around them, Sarah realized they were not alone. They had each other, and that was a force to be reckoned with. "Together," she shouted, rallying her strength. "We won't let them take us." With renewed determination, they faced the shadows, prepared to fight against the darkness that threatened to consume them whole. The darkness surged around Sarah and Ryan, an insatiable tide of shadows clawing at their resolve. The chilling whispers twisted through the air, growing louder, each word wrapping around their hearts like icy fingers, threatening to pull them under. But together they stood firm, united against the encroaching nightmare. "Stay together," Sarah shouted, her voice a beacon amidst the chaos. The shadows lunged toward them, formless but filled with a sinister energy. She swung the frying pan again, feeling it cut through the darkness, but the shadowy tendrils only seemed to dissipate, reforming almost immediately. "Keep swinging. We can't let them close in," Ryan yelled, gripping a kitchen knife, his eyes fierce with determination. With every swing, every thrust, the shadows recoiled and writhed, but their persistence was unnerving. It felt like fighting a fog. No matter how much they fought back, the darkness flowed seamlessly around them, creeping closer and closer. "Where are they coming from?" Sarah shouted, her voice strained. "It's like they're everywhere." "I don't know," Ryan replied, panic creeping into his voice. "But we have to find a way to stop them." As the shadows coiled around their legs, Sarah could feel the cold seep into her bones, draining her strength. She glanced toward the front door, now hanging off its hinges, the darkness eager to rush inside. "Sarah," Ryan's voice broke through her panic, and she looked back to see him thrusting the knife at a swirling mass of shadow that lunged for him. "If we can make it to the window, we might be able to get outside." "No," she exclaimed, the fear of the unknown paralyzing her. "What if it's worse out there? We can't stay here. This is their territory," he shouted back, desperation mingling with resolve. In that moment, Sarah felt the shadows wrap around her ankles, pulling her toward the ground. A sharp cry of alarm escaped her lips as she stumbled, the weight of the darkness threatening to overwhelm her. "Hold on," Ryan yelled, lunging toward her. He grabbed her hand and yanked her upright, pulling her back from the brink. Together, they began to move, dodging and weaving as they made their way toward the kitchen window, the shadows clawing at them as they fought their way through. Each step felt like wading through thick molasses, the darkness clinging to them, trying to drag them down. "Almost there," Ryan urged, pushing ahead with determination. "Just a little further." The whispers swirled around them, growing louder, their voices rising to a maddening pitch. "You cannot escape. You belong to us," they chanted, an otherworldly harmony that reverberated through Sarah's skull. "Shut up," Sarah shouted, swinging the frying pan wildly, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "You don't own us." But the shadows only laughed, a cold, haunting sound that echoed through the kitchen. They surged forward, enveloping her in darkness, and for a fleeting moment, despair washed over her. "No," she gasped, shaking her head. "We will not give in." With a fierce determination she pressed on, Ryan at her side, their shared fear igniting a spark of courage within them. They reached the kitchen window, and Sarah fumbled with the latch, her fingers trembling. "Open, damn it," she cried, wrenching at the window. The glass resisted, the darkness coiling around them, tightening like a noose. But just as she felt the despair creeping in, she heard Ryan shout, "I've got it." He turned the latch, and with a loud creak, the window flew open, the cool night air rushing in like a breath of fresh hope. "Go," he shouted, motioning for her to climb out first. Sarah hesitated for a split second, glancing back at the shadows that surged toward them, the whispers growing more frantic. "What if we don't make it?" she asked, fear constricting her throat. "Just trust me," he urged, determination etched on his face. With a deep breath, she nodded, scrambling onto the windowsill and swinging her legs over. The night air was sharp against her skin, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the kitchen. "Come on," Ryan urged, following her lead. Just as he climbed onto the sill, a loud crash echoed behind them. The kitchen door splintered further, the shadows pouring in like an inky tide. "Jump," Sarah yelled, and without hesitation, they both leaped into the darkened alley below. The impact was jarring, and Sarah stumbled, falling to one knee as she hit the ground. Ryan landed beside her, quickly getting to his feet. They glanced back at the window, the shadows now spilling through the broken frame like a living nightmare. "Run," Ryan shouted, pulling her along as they dashed down the alley, the cool night air cutting through the tension of their earlier fears. The street was eerily quiet, illuminated only by the flickering streetlights that seemed to sway like ghostly sentinels. They hurried down the sidewalk, adrenaline surging through their veins, but even as they ran, the whispers followed, a haunting echo that lingered in the air. "Where do we go?" Sarah gasped, her breath coming in quick bursts. "Anywhere but here," Ryan shouted, glancing back at the apartment, shadows swirling ominously in the dim light. "We need to find somewhere safe." They sprinted past the familiar houses, now shrouded in darkness. The once cozy neighborhood felt foreign and menacing, each shadow a potential threat. As they rounded a corner, a chilling sound echoed through the night, a low growl that reverberated in the pit of Sarah's stomach, sending a jolt of fear racing through her. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, glancing around. Ryan nodded, his face pale. "It's getting closer." "Where do we go?" she asked, panic bubbling to the surface again. "Over there," he shouted, pointing to a small convenience store at the end of the block. "We can hide inside until it passes." They dashed toward the store, their hearts pounding, but just as they reached the door, the shadows seemed to surge behind them, a living entity driven by hunger. "Quick," Ryan yelled, yanking the door open. They stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind them, hearts racing as they leaned against the cool metal. The convenience store was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering ominously. Shelves were stocked with familiar items, but the comforting presence of snacks and drinks felt alien amidst the palpable tension. "Do you think they'll follow us in here?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she took a step back from the door. Ryan shook his head, but his expression was grim. "I don't know. We need to find a place to hide and wait it out." They moved deeper into the store, searching for a spot that would provide some semblance of security, but the shadows outside felt omnipresent, and every creak of the floorboards made Sarah jump. "Over here," Ryan whispered, pointing to a narrow aisle, lined with shelves stacked high. They ducked behind a display of cereal boxes, hearts racing as they held their breath. Outside, the whispers grew louder, the shadows swirling around the building like a storm. Sarah pressed her back against the cold metal shelves, her heart pounding in her chest as she strained to hear anything beyond the cacophony of darkness. "What do they want?" she murmured, fear and confusion knotting in her stomach. "They want us," Ryan replied, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I don't know why." The shadows continued to writhe outside, a dark, shifting mass that coiled and twisted with an almost sentient hunger. The whispers formed a chaotic symphony, rising and falling like waves crashing against the shore. "Do you think they can get in here?" Sarah asked, her heart racing with fear. "I hope not," Ryan replied, his eyes darting around the store. "But we have to stay quiet. If they know we're here." Suddenly, the lights flickered again, plunging them into darkness for a heartbeat. A cold shiver raced down Sarah's spine, and she felt Ryan tense beside her. "Stay close," he whispered, gripping her hand tightly. They waited, holding their breath as the shadows pressed against the building, the whispers growing more intense, a chilling harmony that rattled Sarah's nerves. "Let us in, let us in," the voices chanted, an echo of desperate longing that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the store. She felt a chill settle deep within her bones. "What do they want from us?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Maybe they want us to open the door," Ryan replied, a flicker of fear crossing his face. "But we can't let them in." They huddled closer together, pressing against the shelves, the darkness closing in around them like a vice. Sarah could feel her pulse racing, a rhythmic reminder of their fear, as the shadows swirled outside, an insatiable tide of despair and hunger. "Sarah," Ryan said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "if they get in, we need to fight. We can't give in to the darkness." She nodded, her heart pounding with determination. "Together," she echoed, her voice stronger now. "We can't let them take us." As they sat in the darkness, the shadows outside began to shift, their whispers growing more frenzied, a chorus of longing and despair that clawed at the edges of Sarah's sanity. But amidst the rising tide of fear, she felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, a reminder that they were not alone in this fight. Together, they could face whatever darkness lay ahead. The shadows outside the convenience store swirled and pulsed like a living organism, their whispers rising to a fevered pitch. Sarah and Ryan pressed against the cold shelves, hearts racing, each breath heavy with dread. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead seemed to sync with their rising panic, illuminating their faces with ghostly flashes that flickered in and out, like a heartbeat on the verge of stopping. "Do you think they're trying to lure us out?" Sarah whispered, her eyes darting toward the windows, where dark tendrils coiled like serpents, searching for a way inside. "Maybe," Ryan replied, his voice low and strained. "But we can't give in to them. We can't let them win." The shadows seemed to pulse in response, a dark rhythm that echoed the tension in the air. "Let us in," they chanted, their voices a chilling chorus that reverberated off the walls. "We just want to play." Sarah shuddered, the words scraping against her mind like nails on a chalkboard. "What kind of game is this?" she breathed, fear rising in her throat like bile. "I don't know," Ryan said, his jaw set in determination. "But we have to stay strong. We can't let them manipulate us." As they huddled in the narrow aisle, Sarah felt the weight of their situation bearing down on her. The world outside had devolved into chaos, and the shadows seemed to thrive on that chaos, seeking to turn their fear into despair. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, plunging them into darkness for a heartbeat. "Hold your breath," Ryan urged, his voice a tense whisper. They fell silent, straining to hear anything beyond the cacophony of whispers. The store felt like a tomb, heavy with the weight of their fear. Sarah squeezed Ryan's hand, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. "Do you think we'll make it out of here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "We have to," Ryan replied firmly. "We're stronger together, remember. No matter what they throw at us, we can fight back." Just as his words settled in her mind, a loud crash echoed through the store, shaking the shelves and rattling the fluorescent lights. "What was that?" Sarah gasped, fear gripping her throat. Ryan peered cautiously around the corner of the aisle, his eyes wide with terror. "I think they're trying to get in." The sounds of chaos rose outside, a frantic symphony of breaking glass and angry whispers, a storm of shadows that pressed against the walls like a living entity. The convenience store felt less like a refuge and more like a trap. "We can't just wait for them to find a way in," Sarah insisted, her heart racing. "We have to do something." "Okay, let's regroup," Ryan said, glancing toward the back of the store. "There's an emergency exit. If we can reach it, we might have a chance." Together, they slipped out from behind the shelves, keeping low as they crept toward the back of the store. Each step felt like a journey through thick mud, the oppressive weight of the shadows pressing in on them. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around them like a noose. "Let us in. Let us in. We only want to play." "No," Sarah shouted, her voice breaking. "We don't want to play your games." They reached the emergency exit, and Ryan yanked the door open, revealing a narrow alleyway behind the store. The night air felt different here, cooler but heavy with an unshakable sense of dread. "Quick," Ryan urged, glancing over his shoulder. "We need to move." As they stepped into the alley, the shadows surged toward them, filling the store behind with an ominous presence. The whispers turned into frantic screams, a cacophony of lost souls echoing in the night. "Go, go, go," Sarah yelled, urging Ryan forward as they sprinted down the alley, the darkness chasing them like a hungry beast. They burst out onto the main street, the world around them swallowed in shadows and chaos. The once familiar neighborhood now felt like a different world, a distorted reflection of the life they knew. "What now?" Sarah gasped, glancing around for any sign of safety. "We need to find a place to hide, somewhere they can't reach us," Ryan replied, his eyes scanning the surroundings. A flicker of movement caught her attention. "Over there." She pointed to a nearby abandoned car, its windows shattered and body covered in a thick layer of dust. "We can hide inside." "Good idea," Ryan said, and they dashed toward the car, their hearts racing with urgency. They ducked behind the vehicle, quickly crawling into the back seat. The interior smelled stale, and the glass crunched underfoot, but it provided a temporary refuge. As they settled into the cramped space, the whispers faded momentarily, replaced by the sound of their heavy breathing. "We need to catch our breath," Ryan said, leaning against the seat, "but we can't stay here long." "What if they find us?" Sarah asked, anxiety creeping back in. "They won't," Ryan replied, his eyes steady. "We just need to be smart about this." But just as he spoke, the whispers returned, sharper and more frantic than before. "You cannot hide from us. We are everywhere. You cannot escape." Sarah shivered, the voices gnawing at her sanity. "What do they want?" she whispered, clenching her fists. "They want to feed off our fear," Ryan said, his expression grim. "We have to stay calm. If we give in to the panic, they'll have us." With each whisper, Sarah felt the walls of her mind close in, the suffocating weight of despair threatening to overwhelm her. "But it's so hard," she cried, her voice thick with emotion. "What if we don't make it?" "We will," Ryan insisted, taking her hands in his. "We will make it, together." The shadows outside the car pulsed with life, twisting and writhing in an undulating dance. Join us, they chanted, a hypnotic melody that wrapped around her thoughts. "No," Sarah shouted, shaking her head fiercely. "We refuse to join you." The shadows recoiled momentarily, and a flicker of hope ignited within her. "We're stronger than this," she murmured, drawing strength from Ryan's unwavering gaze. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steadier. "We find a way to fight back," he said, determination igniting his features. "We can't let them take us. We need to outsmart them." Sarah nodded, feeling a surge of strength as she gripped the edge of the seat. "But how?" "There has to be something in this car we can use," Ryan said, scanning the interior, "a tool or something to defend ourselves." She began to rummage through the debris in the back seat, searching for anything that could be of use. Her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, an old tire iron, worn but sturdy. "Here," she exclaimed, pulling it free. "This might work." Ryan nodded, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Good thinking. If they get in here, we'll be ready." They settled back into the cramped seat, the shadows outside swirling ominously, their whispers clawing at the edges of Sarah's mind. But with the tire iron in her hands, she felt a renewed sense of resolve. "Okay," Ryan said, his voice steady. "On 3, we're going to make a break for it. We'll head toward the park and find a place to regroup." Sarah nodded, adrenaline surging through her. "Right, let's do this." 1, 2, 3, Ryan shouted as they flung open the doors, sprinting out of the car and into the chaotic night. The darkness surged toward them, the shadows coiling around their feet, but they pushed through, determination fueling their every step. As they ran, the park loomed ahead, its familiar trees casting elongated shadows under the pale moonlight. "We can make it," Ryan shouted, urging her on as they dashed into the heart of the park. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that threatened to drown out their resolve. "You cannot escape. You belong to us," they chanted, clawing at the edges of their sanity. But Sarah and Ryan pressed on, reaching the cluster of trees that provided a semblance of safety. They ducked behind the gnarled trunks, panting heavily as they leaned against the rough bark, hearts racing in their chests. "What now?" Sarah gasped, clutching the tire iron tightly. "We need to find a way to fight back," Ryan replied, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Maybe there's something we can use to turn the tide." As they huddled together, the shadows closed in around them, the whispers rising to a fever pitch. Join us, they wailed, their voices a siren's call that threatened to pull them under. Stay strong, Ryan shouted, gripping Sarah's shoulders. We can't let them break us. But even as he spoke, Sarah felt the darkness pressing in, threatening to swallow them whole. What if we can't fight them off? She whispered, fear creeping into her voice. We will, Ryan insisted, his voice steady. We just need to find a way to take back our power. Suddenly, a thought struck her. The emergency broadcast. They mentioned something about a way to protect ourselves. Right, the rules, Ryan exclaimed, his eyes lighting up with realization. Maybe if we follow them, we can fight back. What were the rules again? Sarah asked, her heart racing. Ryan closed his eyes, recalling the chilling announcement. We need to stay together, keep our emotions in check, and don't give in to despair. But there was something else. About the shadows, Sarah prompted, desperate to remember. Yes, Ryan nodded. They said something about light. If we can find a way to harness it, we can push them back. Light, Sarah murmured, glancing around the dark park. There must be something here we can use. The trees swayed in the wind, their leaves whispering secrets. What about those lanterns? She suggested, pointing to a cluster of weathered lamps scattered along the path. Good idea, Ryan replied, his eyes shining with determination. Let's go. They dashed toward the lanterns, the shadows snapping at their heels like ravenous wolves. Don't let them catch you, Sarah shouted, adrenaline coursing through her veins. They reached the first lantern, but it was dark and lifeless, the glass cracked and covered in grime. This one's no good, Ryan said, moving on to the next. As they checked the next one, Sarah felt a surge of hope. Wait, this one looks better. She reached for the lantern, its glass slightly cracked but intact. Can you get it to light? Ryan asked, glancing back nervously as the shadows writhed around them. I think so, Sarah replied, focusing on the lantern. It was old but sturdy, and she could feel a sense of warmth emanating from it. If I can just find a way to get it lit. Quickly, Ryan urged, his voice tense. With trembling fingers, she fumbled with the lantern's mechanism, searching for any way to bring it to life. Come on, she whispered, her heart racing. Suddenly, a cold breath of air wrapped around them, and the whispers rose to a fevered pitch. You cannot escape. You belong to us, the shadows screamed, their voices an agonizing chorus. No, Sarah shouted, feeling the shadows press in around them, suffocating and all-consuming. We will not give in. With a fierce determination, she twisted the lantern's mechanism, and to her surprise, a flicker of light burst forth, illuminating the surrounding darkness. Look, Ryan exclaimed, his eyes widening as the warm glow pushed back the shadows, creating a small sanctuary of light. The darkness recoiled, the whispers faltering as they were momentarily pushed back. No, you cannot do this, they shrieked, their voices shrill and panicked. We can and we will, Sarah shouted, holding the lantern high, its light growing brighter with every passing moment. Together, they stood in the heart of the darkness, the warm glow pushing back the shadows like a shield. We won't let you take us, Ryan yelled, his voice filled with newfound strength. The whispers became a cacophony of rage, but the light grew stronger, illuminating the park around them. Sarah felt the warmth wash over her, filling her with hope and courage. We need to keep moving, Ryan shouted, taking her hand and leading her deeper into the park, the lantern held high. The shadows writhed and twisted, but with every step, the light cut through their darkness, pushing them back. Stay close, Ryan urged, glancing over his shoulder. Together, they forged ahead, the whispers fading into the distance as they ventured deeper into the heart of the park. The shadows loomed around them, but the lantern's light created a protective barrier, shielding them from despair. As they moved forward, Sarah's mind raced. What if we find more lanterns? We could create a path of light. Great idea, Ryan replied, his excitement contagious. Let's keep searching. They hurried through the trees, the shadows clawing at the edges of their light. But with each lantern they found and ignited, their resolve grew stronger. The park became a sanctuary, the flickering lights creating a web of protection against the encroaching darkness. Look, Sarah shouted, pointing to a cluster of lanterns further down the path. We can light those too. As they rushed toward them, the whispers returned, angrier and more desperate than before. "You cannot escape us. You belong to us," they shrieked, their voices clawing at the edges of their sanity. "No, we refuse to join you," Ryan shouted back, determination etched on his face. They reached the next lantern, and Sarah quickly lit it, the warm glow expanding outward and pushing back the shadows. With each light they ignited, the darkness retreated, the whispers faltering as if the shadows themselves were afraid of the growing illumination. "This is working," Ryan exclaimed, his eyes shining with hope. "We can take back our power." As they continued to light the lanterns, the darkness began to dissipate, the shadows shrinking back into the corners of the park. The whispers grew fainter, their haunting melody becoming a distant echo. "Keep going," Sarah urged, her heart racing with excitement. "We're almost there." With every lantern they lit, the world around them transformed, the park becoming a sanctuary of light amidst the chaos. The shadows that had once seemed so powerful were now mere wisps of darkness, easily dispelled by their radiant glow. "Look," Ryan pointed ahead, where a tall oak tree stood bathed in light. "If we can reach that, we might be safe." "Let's go," Sarah shouted, her heart pounding with exhilaration. They sprinted toward the tree, the lanterns creating a path of illumination behind them. The shadows lashed out, desperate to reclaim their prey, but the light held them at bay, pushing back the encroaching darkness. As they reached the base of the oak, Ryan looked up, awe shining in his eyes. "This tree, it feels different, like it's alive." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with hope. "Maybe it's our sanctuary." Together, they settled against the sturdy trunk, the lanterns flickering around them, creating a circle of light that kept the shadows at bay. "This is it," Ryan said, his voice steady. "We've fought back, we've taken back our power." Together, Sarah echoed, feeling the warmth of the lanterns surround them. "We can't let the darkness consume us." As the shadows writhed at the edges of their light, the whispers faded to a distant echo. "You cannot hold us back forever," they shrieked, their voices tinged with desperation. "But we can hold you back now," Ryan said firmly, his eyes burning with determination. The darkness pulsed around them, a storm of despair and hunger, but the warm glow of their lanterns stood firm against the tide. In that moment, Sarah felt a surge of strength and clarity. "We will not be defeated. We are stronger than the shadows." As they sat beneath the oak tree, enveloped in the light, the whispers grew fainter, the shadows retreating into the night. Together, they had forged a path of light, a sanctuary in the heart of darkness. As Sarah and Ryan sat beneath the sprawling oak, the last remnants of the shadows danced just beyond the reach of their lanterns. The night felt charged with a palpable energy, a tension that hummed in the air around them. But within their circle of light, a sense of safety enveloped them, filling their hearts with the courage to confront what lay ahead. "We've fought them off for now," Ryan said, his voice steady yet tinged with urgency. "But we can't let our guard down. They'll be back." Sarah nodded, her mind racing with thoughts of how to truly end this nightmare. "What if we can trap them? Use the light against them somehow?" "Maybe we can create a barrier," Ryan suggested. "If we could draw them into one spot and then use all the lanterns at once, it might be enough to banish them." "Right. We could set a trap," Sarah agreed, her heart racing at the idea. "But we'll need more lanterns. There must be some more in the park." With newfound determination, they scanned the area, and Sarah spotted a cluster of older lanterns near the park entrance, barely visible through the twisted branches and dense foliage. "There," she pointed. "If we can reach those, we could create a powerful barrier." "Let's move," Ryan urged, gripping the tire iron tightly as they prepared to venture out into the shadows. Together, they stood, holding their lanterns high as they stepped out of the circle of light. The darkness closed in around them, whispering promises of despair and dread. "You cannot escape us. You belong to us," the voices hissed, their tone increasingly frantic. "No," Sarah shouted defiantly, "we refuse to let you take us." As they hurried toward the lanterns, the shadows writhed and twisted, reaching for them like greedy hands. Each step felt like wading through a thick fog, the darkness pressing in on all sides. The whispers crescendoed, an urgent plea that clawed at the edges of their sanity. "Faster," Ryan urged, glancing back at the encroaching shadows. "We're almost there." They reached the lanterns just as the darkness lunged at them, a tide of despair threatening to swallow them whole. With shaking hands, Sarah ignited the first lantern, the warm light flooding the space around them and pushing back the shadows for a brief moment. "Keep going," Ryan shouted, lighting another lantern. The glow radiated warmth, illuminating the twisted trees around them. As they lit the last lantern in the cluster, the shadows faltered, their voices turning to frantic shrieks. "You cannot do this. You will regret it." "Not today," Ryan yelled, his eyes fierce with determination. With all the lanterns now glowing, Sarah felt a surge of hope. "Let's create the barrier." They hurried back to the oak tree, their hearts pounding as the shadows snapped at their heels. With every step, the darkness pulsed with rage, but their lanterns held strong, illuminating a path through the chaos. Once back beneath the oak, they arranged the lanterns in a wide circle around them, positioning them strategically to form a barrier against the encroaching darkness. The shadows writhed in frustration, their whispers a cacophony of fury. "Now what?" Sarah asked, glancing at Ryan. "We focus all the light toward the center," he said, his eyes alight with determination. "We'll create a powerful surge of energy that might be enough to drive them away." "Right," Sarah nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Let's do it." They both knelt beside the lanterns, taking deep breaths to steady themselves. "On three, we focus our energy into the lanterns," Ryan instructed, his voice calm and steady. 1, 2, 3. Together they poured all their fear, hope, and determination into the lanterns, their minds synchronizing with the glow. The lanterns flickered violently at first, but then they began to radiate a brilliant light, illuminating the park in a warm, golden glow. The shadows writhed violently, their whispers turning into screams of anguish. "No, you cannot do this," they wailed, their voices echoing in despair. "Now," Ryan shouted, directing the energy toward the center of their circle. The light blazed brighter, a dazzling beacon that pushed back the darkness, forcing it to recoil. The shadows shrieked in fury, twisting and thrashing against the barrier of light. "You cannot escape us. You will always belong to us," they screamed, their voices growing fainter as the brilliance of the lantern surged. "Keep going," Sarah yelled, her heart racing. "We're almost there." With one final push, they concentrated their energy into the lanterns, the light exploding outward in a radiant wave. The darkness shuddered, the whispers turning into panic-headed cries as the light engulfed them. In a brilliant flash, the shadows evaporated, swirling away like mist in the morning sun. The park, once cloaked in darkness, was now filled with the soft glow of the lanterns, illuminating the night with warmth and safety. They collapsed to the ground, breathless and exhilarated, as the last echoes of the shadows faded into silence. "We did it," Ryan gasped, his face lit with disbelief. "We really did," Sarah said, feeling the weight of fear lift from her shoulders. They exchanged a look, and in that moment, they knew they had triumphed over the darkness that had threatened to consume them. But even in their victory, a lingering sense of unease crept back into her mind. "Do you think they're really gone?" she asked, glancing nervously around the park. "I don't know," Ryan replied, his expression thoughtful, "but we've proven we can fight back. As long as we have each other, we can face whatever comes next." They sat together, surrounded by the warm glow of the lanterns, feeling the weight of the world slowly shift. But just as they began to relax, a faint whisper echoed through the night, sending chills down Sarah's spine. "You cannot banish us. We will return." "No," Sarah breathed, fear gripping her heart once more. "We will fight again if we have to." Ryan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll be ready. Together we can face anything." As they looked around at the lanterns casting soft glows in the darkness, they felt a sense of resolve wash over them. The shadows may have retreated for now, but the battle wasn't over. But in this moment, they were safe, and the strength of their bond illuminated the path ahead, a beacon of hope in a world fraught with uncertainty. The sun began to rise, casting golden rays over the park, transforming it into a landscape of vibrant colors and life. The shadows had receded into whispers, but Sarah and Ryan stood united, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the first light broke through the trees, they knew their fight was far from over, but they had discovered the power of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond they shared. They had fought the darkness together, and together they would continue to shine, lighting the way through the shadows. The dawn was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, light could always be found, and as long as they held onto that light, they would never be lost.